Mike is live.
So, excuse me, it's 6:30 PM now, so I'll call the meeting to order, and the first item of business is the election of the chair, so I just need a nomination from the floor for the chair.
I nominate Bill. Oh, Jerry, go ahead, sorry.
That's okay.
You go ahead, Jerry.
I was going to just say that one, nominate Bill McDonald.
I'll second it.
Okay, so. And is there any other nominations for chair? Seeing none, can I just get a mover to close nominations? Mr. Vanderwall. And a seconder? Will. All in favor? And then I just need a nomination for a vice chair.
I'll be Ron Van Wall.
I'll second that.
Is there any other nominations for vice chair? So being none, I will just ask for a nomination to close
All those
nominations.
that we close nominations?
And Councillor Martin, you second that? So Councillor McDonald, do you wish to stand as chair?
Here.
And Councillor Vanderwall, do you wish to stand as vice chair? So Councillor McDonald, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Perhaps the first thing we should do is introduce everybody that's in the room to the joint meeting here. So I'll start. Al,
Paul Rebel, I'm the chair of the admin facility task force at Kettle Creek Conservation.
Claire Smith, I'm vice chair of the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority Board and the appointed representative for the Township of Rideau Lakes.
Hi, I'm Paul McCauley. I'm the chair of the Cataraqui Conservation Board. I am a citizen rep from Loyalist.
Sorry, I'm Janetta Meany. I'm the clerk of the county of Frontenac.
My name is Jerry Martin. I'm representing Frontenac County. I'm from the North Frontenac Township.
Ron Vanderwall. I'm on county council and vice chair of the administrative tax.
Don Stoll, Warden Frontenac County.
Dawn Campbell, assistant to the chair and general manager of the Cataraqui Conservation.
Conservation Lands
County Vendor, Chief Administrative Officer, County of Frontenac.
thank you. And we have with us on Zoom Councillor Higgs, Councillor Smith. Who else is in behind the mask there?
Katrina Furlanetto, general manager of the Cataraqui Conservation.
Okay, well, welcome to the meeting. We're going to move on. Could I have a motion from someone, or do you have a motion from someone to adopt the minutes of the last meeting?
By Councillor Vanderwall and seconded by Councillor Martin, that the adoption be done first, that the agenda for the June 8, 2022 meeting and the addendum of the Administrative Building Design Task Force be adopted.
Any discussion on the motion before us? All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. I apologize for saying calling for the minutes before the agenda. Are there any disclosures by any member of the panel on tonight? tonight's agenda by any member. Minutes will indicate no disclosures indicated. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes of the last meeting?
That is moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Van Wall that the minutes of the administrative design building design task force meeting held February 17th, 2021 be adopted.
You heard the minutes, have heard the motion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any other submissions? All in favor of the motion? Motion carried. Now deputation, presentation, I'll turn it over to our report. Kelly?
Thank you, Chair McDonald. It's a pleasure to be here today. We thought we'd just begin with a brief overview of where we've been and how we got here. And it's a bit of a long and winding trail, as members of the committee know, participating on this. So just a bit of an agenda. I will provide a bit of a project overview. We've asked Todd to give you clarification on the bids received and confirmation that they meet the specifications as required. Alex Lemieux, our treasurer, will go through the budget and financial breakdown based upon the bid. And we have a question and answer, and Katrina is available, but if need be, she can chime in as well. So we're here for questions and answers. And for the question and answer portion of the meeting, or at the chair's direction, any person present can ask a question. We're not going to just committee members. So any of the rest of county council on the line or members of the CRCA board will be free to ask questions. We want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with the information they're receiving tonight and have enough information to go back to their board or to council to make a final decision. So the project began in 2013 with a service delivery review. Pardon the typos in this. I copied and pasted from a report from 2013, which had the same errors in it. But basically, it began with a report from 2013 suggesting that the county look at new administrative headquarters and suggested that we may want to look at a location in the county of Frontenac, which was part of the service delivery organizational review of 2013. So we began in 2016 with formal meetings. It was our first meeting. At that point, we reviewed WSP condition assessment report on the building. And at that point, they identified a deficit, a capital deficit of about $212,000 in maintenance required in the building. And I'm here to confirm that since 2016, we have not done that $212,000. We still have the same issues that we had in 2012, and much of this project tonight that we'll talk about will solve that. The committee completed a walkabout looking at staff conditions. We even went up in the attic and down in the basement and talked to various staff, and that was our first tentative steps at looking at this building and what it could look like. In 2017, we began talks on alternate workspaces, including the idea of moving into the county. We looked at options for renovation and or expansion of this building, including the third floor attic. We examined in detail 8 different options, including the financial impact of those. And we began looking at co-location options with the Township of South Frontenac and with the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority and the team at CKA, Colburn and Campbell Associates, did a report on some of the various options and did a detailed report for the CRCA looking at a standalone facility. In 2018, the Building Task Force met an additional 4 times. And during those, we met mainly with the CRCA in joint sessions or parallel sessions. Looked at the current location, went to the CRCA site at Little Cataraqui Region Conservation Area, looked at their site. And we also looked at a site in Sydenham that could have been a joint location with the Township of South Frontenac and the CRCA. We hired a facilitator, Rob Wood, to work us through that process and identify potential options and hurdles to that. We met at the outdoor center at the Conservation Authority for that meeting, and Rob reported back with his findings. And the architect, again, CKA was hired to examine the options and to provide the committee with a little bit more depth in terms of costs and options available to them. In 2019, we held an additional 5 meetings. Again, a lot of those meetings were either joint or in parallel with the Conservation Authority. We reviewed the options for the CKA report. We received municipal modernization funding to assist with the design. South Frontenac withdrew from the process, instead looking at a standalone option for South Frontenac. We eliminated the CRCA site largely because of site servicing issues. And the CKA report estimated total cost with the CRCA of about 3.7 million, recognizing that that was 2019, pre-pandemic, and a lot of other things. That was the order of magnitude that we were looking at in 2019. The work plan was approved, including the development of a memorandum of understanding with the Conservation Authority, which was signed in the fall of 2021 and signed by both parties. So we do have a memorandum of understanding between the 2 parties that lays out essentially the outline of what would be a lease agreement, our obligations through the design process, right up to this last decision point, which is where we're at tonight and next week, is the final go, no go situation. In 2020, you may remember that we had a pandemic that began that year, so we kind of set a few things in life aside. But the final concept plan was endorsed by the task force and by the CRCA, and Todd and his team began the detailed design. One of the things that I have to give credit to Todd and Justin and Tim, the team that was largely involved in this project. We initially set out thinking that the 3rd floor was our better option, and weren't looking at the basement. We were looking at a much larger expansion. But Todd and his team came up with some really good ideas in terms of using basement and the area underneath the proposed new council chamber / boardroom that I think is going to make a very effective building, and ultimately will save us some dollars because the renovation costs are less than the capital costs, which we'll get into costs in a moment. The design, which was reviewed by the task force and by the Conservation Authority, an emphasis on smaller office spaces, which recognizes some of the changing dynamics with work. But at the same time, I think we've got a really high quality use of a collaboration space that we're calling meeting rooms, gathering spaces, such as the new boardroom, council chambers, and the new staff space, which I think will work very well in the work environment moving forward. So a very strong emphasis on collaboration space. All of the accessibility issues were addressed and have been reviewed by the Accessibility Committee at the City of Kingston and the Accessibility Committee for the County of Frontenac. So we meet those requirements. Most of those now are code requirements. So it's not like it was 10 years ago where working outside the building code. Most of those issues are now addressed through building code compliance and Todd's to make sure of that. But as I said, we made more efficient public space as well, in particular the shared reception area. So it will be both accessible and large enough to meet organizations. In 2021, we held 2 meetings. We reviewed the Class D estimate of 4.21 million. I'll put that up in a little bit. We reviewed the council, we revised the council chambers layout and made some changes based upon input from the committee and from staff in terms of how that council room / boardroom would function. And I have a picture of that in a moment. We reviewed the split for the costing. So basically 100% of the square footage, and then we look at what percentage is dedicated Conservation Authority and what percentage is dedicated county, and then each of us share common space on that same percentage. So at the end of the day, and there's a lot of calculations that Todd and Justin did from CKA, working with Alex to make sure that worked, and Katrina to make sure we had our numbers right. But it's basically for ignoring the decimal points, about 68-32, 68% county of Frontenac, 32% Conservation Authority. So the total cost, that's how it gets divided out. And that process was laid out in the memorandum of understanding from a couple of years back. We did receive infrastructure funding grant of an additional $100,000, which again, so we've got $200,000 coming off the total price, $100,000 on the design component, $100,000. Remember, we were looking at making the front foyer larger to accommodate social distancing. We went out to tender with that. The project came in over tender, over a budget amount. So that was revised and included in this project. And we also had, so as I said, bids for the standalone reception area were rejected as over budget, but they're now included in the new project. So this was the estimate that we reviewed, and this is the County of Frontenac portion from Class D estimate, just to give you a sense of the level of detail. Here we are in 20. You want to go back to that?
Do you wish to have the questions all at the end or at any time?
At your discretion, Mr. Chair, as we go.
About the percentage, just one quick question.
Yeah.
Well, maybe before we get into the question, I just want to say thanks very much to all the staff, both on our side and the Cataraqui Conservation Authority, for all the work going into this. I think it was 10 years ago when I was on council, we started agreement about this and knew we had an issue. So and we had lots of, as you said, scenarios of what we might do or might not do. And I'm very pleased that we landed on the spot where we have the regional conservation, Cataraqui Conservation Authority partnering with us. It was going to be a good fit. But the question I had on that number, which is 68, 32.
Yeah.
If things should change over the years, let's say we have to hire a lot more staff, or and CAT goes down, or vice versa, will that be looked at on some kind of a regular basis, or is this fixed for forever?
It's fixed, but I suspect, and Katrina, Alex and I will be meeting with Tony Fleming. We both deal with Tony Fleming. He's agreed to do the lease agreement. So that's a good question for Tony as to how we do that. I suspect that any changes to increase would require addition, which would be, if it's a conservation authority. So we could use the same general formula that if it's dedicated space as a percentage of the total. But we haven't really contemplated that.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we're a creature of the province, and the province, for example, might take one of our functions away from us, and we don't only need 3/4 of the staff we have now. And if the opposite happened for the CAT organization, that their numbers go up, they'd have to move into some of our these. Yeah, you're probably right. The lawyers will probably have some verbiage to put in if those things come up.
Yeah, and Tony is working off Mr. Fleming is working off the memorandum of understanding. So we'll be meeting with him because that'll be coming to, assuming everything goes forward, the actual lease agreement will be coming in July to county council. And the conservation authority doesn't have a meeting until August. So we'll get that squared around for the.
Just
Thank
have
you. Thank you.
one question.
For Mark?
Yeah, to Warden Doyle's point, I would suspect that perhaps the geographical area of Frontline County may change in the near future. We have a new government in Queens Park. And, that could very well happen. It could change the whole demographics of Frontline County. And we have a concern that needs to be there because we don't want to wind up a whole bunch of empty, brand new empty office space.
Or we're putting on in addition.
Exactly right. Yes.
And, you know, we talked about that a fair bit through the early parts of the task force. And I guess, you know, at the end of the day, we can only deal with the information that we've got. And at the same time, I don't want to be like a school where the day you put it up, you're adding two portables. So we do have some expansion options. The attic still is an option. The additions that are put on were fairly modest compared to some of the early ideas that we had. We still have room to put on other additions, and if we contract, then there's going to be other issues to deal with. Other than these two, so here we are, the first meeting of 2022. So the release of the final tender was delayed largely due to COVID challenges, both the staffing at CKA, staffing here at the county, and of course, contractors are substantially busier than they were, and some of our contractors had some issues. So we were delayed releasing it, but it was April the 21st. We were originally looking for the end of January, 1st of February. Tender closed on June the 1st, and we did provide 2 extensions. As if you followed your calendar, the meeting date kept getting pushed back. But in consultation with Todd, it felt like you know, the best thing to do was to give contractors as much time as they needed to put together competitive bids, and getting prices from subcontractors is part of that. So we extended it twice. We did receive 4 bids. 4.45 million was the lowest bid from Emmons and Mitchell, and that is in the report and the recommendation of staff, which works out to about $220 per square foot. So closer to 400 for new construction, lesser than that for remodeling, which a lot of this is remodeling. So at the end of the day, a fairly, I think I'd ever say 220 a square foot would be reasonable. Councilor Ravel, it sounds like a lot of money, but in today's world, it's a fairly reasonable budget, and Todd can speak to the technical aspects of that. So just going back to some of the areas that were concerned to the task force and council. These are the final layouts that we produced for the council chambers and boardroom. It was kind of tricky to make the 2 work because county council is a county or a table of 8, whereas the CRCA is a board of 17. So making that work in the same room was a bit of a juggle, and Todd and Justin worked with the task force and with Donna and Jeanette in terms of how many people were needed. You know, we got some good feedback from the task force as well, and we changed some of that design to make that work. This is essentially the main floor as you come in, and a graphical. The different colors indicate the assigned space, so you can see for the non-colorblind and not overly. I deal with the 8-pack Crayola. My wife is a 64-pack, but the bluey green on the left of your screen being the Conservation Authority area, basically in the area that we're sitting. The yellowy color being common area, and the purple being the main floor. County area, the 2nd floor and the basement are also county areas. I didn't include those. So you can see that's how the calculation came to be. So next steps, here we are, June the 8th, and we're suggesting that the motion that's included in the agenda package be forwarded to county council next Wednesday, June the 15th. The recommendation from this committee goes to county council in the morning and to the CRCA board in the evening. The award of the contract would happen the next day. We'd be looking at somewhere around the end of the month. I don't think anybody would be working on July the 1st, but mobilization around July 1st. And because we've phased this project, and again, another one of the reasons why I really like working with Todd and his team, they've come up with a really creative solution that the Conservation Authority would be able to essentially move into this space, fully renovated, end of 2022, first part of 2023, and sometime near the end of 2023, the entire project will be completed and all staff would be. So just a couple of notes, as I said, the lease agreement based on the MOU and the actual design. So that's what we're waiting for those final numbers. We anticipate approval of that or receipt of that in July for discussion with county council. County paramedics, planning and economic development will use the CRCA site during the construction, and the CRCA lease was proposed to commence upon full project completion. So again, another part of the work that we've done with Todd. So neither organization is going to pay for temporary facilities. We'll use theirs, so they move in here, and we'll be saving a fair bit of money on that. We have booked the South Front Neck council chambers for county council meetings. We do have the auditorium, but the auditorium is also our isolation unit that we're required to have because of COVID protocols. At some point that may get relaxed and we could go back to using the auditorium, but in the interim, South Front Neck council chambers are booked. And I'd just like to conclude with a big thank you to Todd, Justin, and Tim for putting up with us over the last 3 or 4 years and the various iterations and all of the wonderful ideas that they've come up to make this work. Of course, Katrina, Tom, and Donna from the Conservation Authority who attended countless meetings and worked with us on logistics and all sorts of stuff. And of course, county council and this committee and county staff who were through the process as well. So with that, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kelly, for your presentation. Are there any questions of Kelly before we let him away from the microphone? Ron?
Did I miss it, Kelly, or where's FPS go?
FPS is going in the basement below the council chamber / boardroom. So if we go back to, they're essentially,
Oh, sorry, I mean now when the renovations are happening, because they're here, right?
they're going to the conservation authority.
Okay, that's what it was. Thank you. That was one question I had, but that's good.
Are there any other questions in regard? I can't see everybody that's zooming in. Are there any questions from Fran or Ron?
None for me.
Thank you. Any other questions in regard to the in the room? Anyone? It's very clear. I should have a mirror. Okay. Yeah. Let me clarify. I'm partially deaf, so I just want you to know when you're speaking.
Yeah.
I may have trouble here.
And I mumble, so.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'm not sure if this is for you or someone else is coming, but I do procurement. And I was quite amazed at how low the number was, given what challenges we've had in our sector. So I don't know if you can comment on whether that's because of changes that were made to the design that don't fundamentally impact on the use of the space, if it's just we happen to hit a good vendor, or if there's some risk in the numbers, like particularly if you worry around any type of material given supply issues at this time. So any idea how it came in? Because I was quite shocked at how low it was.
Todd is up next to give an overview of the bids, and that's probably a better question for him. There weren't any substantive changes from the last time the committee looked at it, with a couple doorways. But it's basically the design that both committees reviewed and approved back in 2020. But Todd's up next. Not to put Todd on the hot seat, but Todd, you're up. Okay.
So hi, everyone. I'm Todd Colburn with Colburn Campbell Architects. I was the consultant manager for this project. So Kelly stole a little bit of my thunder because he gave the executive summary of what I was going to say, but I'll still go through it anyway. It'll give you a bit more detail. So as Kelly mentioned, we put this out for tender on April the 21st. We did grant 2 extensions because we felt it was important to get as competitive bids as we can, and we want to make sure we gave everybody reasonable time to do that. I think the results, that was a good decision to have made. The bids were received before 2 p.m. on June the 1st at the county council email address. I'm sorry, actually back up a little bit. I did want to say, just to reiterate, that the bid process was a public bid process. It was advertised publicly and placed on the county website. There was, as part of that process, a mandatory site meeting though. So only contractors that attended the mandatory site meeting would then be eligible to bid. And the reason for that is in a complicated renovation, we want to make sure that everybody understood the building and not come in with an artificially low bid and huge change orders. So 5 contractors, general contractors, attended the mandatory site meeting. So subsequently, we received 4 bids prior to the bid closing date. One of the contractors decided not to submit a bid. The contractors who did submit the bids, we submitted a bid analysis form. I'm not sure if that's one of the slides, but if anybody's interested. And that bid analysis form included the base bid price, executive summary. The 4 firms that submitted bids were Emmons and Mitchell Construction Limited, Alcon Construction Limited, Capito Construction, and England Group. And all 4 bids met the bid criteria and were compliant bids. They submitted all addenda requirements. They had their appropriate bid bonds and their agreement to bond for the construction. So there was a fairly tight range of bids. As Kelly mentioned, our budget was 4.21. I do want to emphasize though that budget dated back to February 2021. And so the actual bid process was 16 months later. So the low bid was 6% over our estimate. So given these times, I think that was pretty amazing actually. The bids were all fairly tight. The low bid was 4.49, a little bit of a typo for Kelly, not 4.45, but close enough. And the high bid was 4.995. So it's quite a tight bid range, which is always good to see. That means nobody made any substantive mistakes. So the low bidder was Emmons and Mitchell Construction with a bid of 4.49 million. Their construction schedule, to give you a very high level, Kelly kind of summarize that a little bit. They were proposing a construction start date of the end of June, beginning of July, with substantial completion of CRCA facilities in December of 2022. And again, that's the space we're in. The overall substantial completion of the project for August of 2023, and total completion of the project for September of 2023. So as Kelly said, then by the time you move in all your furniture and that sort of thing, you're looking at towards the end of September of 2023 for a move in of the rest of the facility. As I mentioned, the low bidder had appropriate bid bond and a letter of surety from a surety consent insurance company for 50% performance and 50% labor material bonds as requested. And because the bid was a compliant bid in accordance with construction industry bidding standards, we recommend that you award the contract to the low bidder, Conservation Construction Limited. So that's my presentation. So
Okay, is there any questions of Todd? Perhaps Paul, did you get your question answered earlier?
Partially. Does the bid have any type of escalators around material?
Sorry, say that again.
So is there any type of escalators around material costs if they find that does go up over the next 6 months, a year as they do in the build?
No, it's a stipulated fixed price contract, not a cost plus contract. So I didn't get into that level of weeds, but one of the strategies, and I guess I should have, because of the current situation, some trades, a lot of them are only holding the prices for 10 days. The general contractor doesn't have that luxury though. So he's got to make a best guess of what pricing is going to be like for the contract stage because it's a stipulated fixed price contract. The traditional bid bond period is 60 days. Sometimes it's 90 days for a public body because they have a lot more approvals process to go through. The problem with that is nobody's willing to hold the price for 90 days right now, or 60 days. So we took a gamble on this and we recommended that we go with a very short bid bond period of 30 days. That gives the contractors a level of assurance that in the next 30 days, hopefully prices are going to go up too much so they can do tighter bids. The downside of that is if it had come in way over budget, we had to negotiate. That might put us towards the end of that bid period before we reach successful negotiations. But fortunately, it's only slightly above the estimate. So assuming it's within your budget approval, the 30-day bid bond period won't be an issue as long as we award the contract within 30 days. That didn't really answer your other question, but getting back to that, yes, it's a very, very sharp price. But the reason for that is, and Kelly touched it at a very high level, the original RFP for our services included a concept, because we'd given 3 different ranges in our previous project options analysis for a very large addition. The problem with that is that additions are, are more like $400 a square foot. New construction of a new building might be 300, renovation 200, in addition to a building 400, just kind of ballpark. So recognizing the situation that COVID had put us into, as soon as we got the award of the contract, we flipped gears and started looking at how can we condense the size of that addition to try to keep the budget as tight as possible. So that's when we came up with the idea. We looked at the attic. The problem with that is it's not accessible. So for the limited area we would have achieved, in order to meet accessibility standards for municipal space, it has to be accessible. We would have had to do an elevator to that attic, as well as 2 sets of stairs. And then you've eaten up a good chunk of your attic or you've done an addition. And at $100,000 to stop for an elevator, that just wasn't going to be economical space. So we quickly deleted that. And we're now using it for just mechanical space. But then we looked at the basement. So we did similar to what we did at the tech center in Kingston, where we made the basement space habitable. We did that here. So we've excavated out the south side of the building to make it, we're calling it lower level, by the way, never use the term basement again. And in fact, we're calling it the patio room. So we've created this really nice full height glazing on the south side with a beautiful patio up there. And so below that smaller addition is the emergency services space, and then other support spaces in the basement of the existing area. And that made it a much more compact addition, and therefore the overall cost comes in at an average of $220 a square foot for that simple reason.
Any other questions or comments from the members of the board in regard to presentation? Now
Todd, I mean, I'm very pleasantly surprised that the change in budget figure is only 6% or so. I was concerned it was much worse, so clearly that's been a load that's been lifted off our minds in terms of the overall budget. So it's a combination of your good work and thank you.
No other questions?
All right, any other questions from anyone in regard to the presentation we just had? No? Okay, perhaps then we'll move forward with the recommendation. Oh, Alec, go ahead. Sorry, I apologize.
We got to let the treasurer out.
He's holding the purse straight there. So I'm sorry, Alec, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, let me just take a quick look. You just have to give it a minute, Alex, because there's a lag in real time. So right now, I'm still seeing Kelly's presentation.
That's IT support.
I'm just going to quickly go over what we've got now in terms of costing and how we're going to finance. So as I mentioned, the construction cost came in at $4.49 million. Within that, site works are calculated, but I kind of built a contingency in there just for the purpose of capital financing, $250,000. Change order comes through, we open up a wall and something we didn't expect was there. So there is a little buffer now just for the financing. And again, we will cost share this based on actual costs. So if we don't need it, that disappears. If we do need it, that will be built in.
What if we come in under?
That number goes lower again. All right, we did receive a grant for the lobby area for $100,000, so that will reduce the total amount eligible to be financed to $4.64 million based on these estimates. As well, per the MOU, we're going to allocate costs based on square feet. So the total square footage, we just shy of 1,900 feet. County share of 829.6 feet. The CRCA share would be 386 feet. What that works out to is an allocation of 68.2% for the county, 31.8% for the CRCA. Our total space remaining, because that's common, that's 682 square feet. We will share that cost per the 68.2, 31.8%. A few further assumptions below. So the assumptions that the length of the lease will be 21 years, and we will finance in parallel with that, so over the same term. Also, in terms of pro formas further in, we're anticipating inflation of 2%. Interest rate on debt is estimated at 5%. That was based off the recent estimate we got in the last month or so. The min charge on the lease would be 5%, and the total percent to be financed per the county policy would be 50%. So we borrow for 50 and take the other 50 out of reserves. So I'm going to just go down to table 5 here. So what that would leave then as a lease payment, so to speak. So on the CRCA side, at the 120,839 based on those inputs. For the county, after county flood, we would be paying for half of it up front. The remaining amount of the venture would be a cost of $69,000. So why that's everyone following so far. Often smile, I like it. All right. So then, in terms of table 3, this is our estimate of the ongoing costs within the building. So these would not be factored in the lease payment, but would still need to be paid on an annual basis. So anything in table 3 would be shared based on the 68.2, 31.8% split, and that was in line with the MOU that was agreed to. So these would all be annual costs based on what we're incurring now, with slight increase for both inflation and for the added square footage. And the 2 one-time costs in here would be technology to outfit the meeting rooms, and as well alarm security. So this would be incurred in the first year, but would not be incurred. So let's have a slight amount for. In terms of the cost that each organization will pay for separately, it would be internet and telephone, and we should estimate that based on what we're incurring. Additional thing here is in terms of other one-time finance expenses. So originally it was laid out that the design and project management fees would be paid up front. So that's not part of the lease payment. That's both CRCA and county would pay their share of that front. As well, the cost of furniture, which would be split based on the furniture needed by each organization, and landscaping costs, which would be 100% county costs, are also soon to be paid for upfront. So that's a summary of the financing. Are there any questions?
Go ahead.
I did have one. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to ask you, Alex, but it worked out well. I'm good with this. Worked out well partnering to go for the bid for the main contract. There's some other things within the package that we got that says on the furniture, each will be responsible for their own. So that, and cost wise, that's good. But are we going to jointly go to tender for furniture and that kind of stuff and have some common type of furniture, like not allow one side to have all plastic chairs and the other all have plush leather chairs and all that? And are we going to force the cat to have the green to match Kelly's plan there, the yellow for common and blue or purple for so have you thought about that yet, or am I going to?
We have discussed that. Now that the town is jointly tendering, we got CRCA will likely be moving in January 2023, whereas full occupancy for us will be closer to 2024. So if you're going to buy 50 desks, you can set up 25, or you're going to have to put 25 somewhere else in the construction zone. So it may not make sense to jointly tender. Probably someone will want to hold the price for a year.
Yeah,
That's what we have discussed it. I don't think we made a decision on it yet, but it has been looked at. In terms of kind of the homogeneity of the furniture, I think the intent is that both will have their distinct spaces and they're fits in that space. So in terms of us being less, or we wouldn't mandate that they need lazy boy leather chairs, for example, in their area. I think both organizations would have the freedom to choose the furniture they want within their space.
thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Claire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wondered if it's possible to find out the annual cost per square foot for the CRCA, if we're paying that $115,085 a year. What's that work out to for a square foot lease?
$227.07. Figure that out.
Thank you.
Councilor Vanderwall.
So just quick math, is that running about it would cost the county about 200,000, no, a little bit more than 200,000 a year, right? 250.
That to the total of the venture or? in
Well,
terms
that,
of
yes,
the
that's
venture
not
plus
counting,
operating?
that's not counting the 50% out, but the county share of the red ones you have there on the right and what our repayment is.
Yeah, so that would be $259,040.
Okay.
And now most of the utilities that we're already incurring as is. So we're not adding to the. Anything that's ongoing cost below, we're already current, we're mostly current to operational. But most of the added cost that would be this 69,159.
Go ahead, Paul.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have 2 questions on some of the specific numbers. I think if I read correctly, every 1% interest rate is going to mean a 10% increase in rent. So how comfortable is 5%? Can you explain what the administrative fee means and if it changes? And is it a debenture for 21 years, so it's set, or will it vary based on the zoning patterns or the decisions that are made by the county on that side?
So the 5% is basically the administration charge for the lease, and that was agreed to on the MOU that was originally set out. The 5% rate on interest was the rate we got, I want to say 2-3 weeks ago, fairly recent rate. I would expect that's good for now. That said, if there's many interest rate increases in the next 18 months, that rate definitely could go up. But as of right now, that would be a good market rate.
And how much can that fluctuate year to year over the 21 years? Like what's your strategy around that, I guess?
So we have some flexibility between on fixed or variable. So the 5% would be a fixed over 20 years. So that would be, could do variable, but then you could have a explain 100, 1 year, 120, next year 140, back to 120.
And then just some questions about the upfront costs, I think under K13, the technology and the alarm. Those are one time, but over a 21-year period, they're going to need to be replaced. Is that just then be shared at the time when they need to between the two?
Yeah, so we kind of worked out in a pro forma here, figuring that the technology would probably be a 5-year renewal. It's around for 10 years at one point. We moved up to 20. But yeah, at that point, the alarm, when it's time for renewal, we would need to renew it. That would be shared cost as well, based on 68, 92.
Okay, and so that year could just become a capital cost as opposed to a lease.
So I believe that'd be operating side leasing. So these
Yeah,
costs
okay.
here we separate from the lease.
Yeah, okay,
But this can really would be the cost of borrowing.
Yeah. okay, thanks.
Councilor Vanderwall.
Can you just explain what 5% administration fee? 5% on what? The total amount all the time, or 5% what? What's that mean?
So that's 5% on the annual debenture payment. Any background on?
So you're kind of paying like 10% then on something, or no?
So this is basically what the county will be charging as a landlord to administer the lease.
Your lease payment was $100. The borrowing was $100, your lease payment was $5. As well, Alex, there is a capital replacement reserve accumulating as part of this as well. So just back to the alarm. It won't be accumulating. It won't be an adjustment to the lease, it will be a drawdown.
Go ahead, Paul.
So if I can just clarify again, there's a 5% interest on the debt, there's a 5% debt, basically allowing the CRCA to access your debt. It's not really an administrative fee for the lease. It's a fee to allow us us to access debt. So in essence, if you're paying 5%, we're paying 10.
No, so. Try to explain to you.
So if the debt actually costs the county, which will be taking up the debt,
Right.
$100.
Right.
The conservation authority would be paying $105. It's not an interest amount, it's a percent of the total. So whatever,
Okay.
whatever the borrow
Okay.
is, 5% on top of that.
Okay.
An
Okay,
additional
that makes
5% of interest.
Thanks.
Any other questions? What about Fran or Ron? Do you have any questions regarding for Alex?
No, I don't. I couldn't hear the clarification on an admin fee. I'll take that offline. I couldn't hear the answer very well.
So basically it would be if the county is paying $100 on debt, CRCA would be paying 105 on it as a result of accessing our debt, and then the administration fee manage which.
Okay.
You heard
And,
that,
and that's
Ron?
to administer the lease. Yeah, that's to administer the lease. Can you explain what that means, please?
Basically, so our obligations as a landlord, so in terms of paying the lease, reporting on the debt that we owe, collecting fees, yeah. That's what that would capture, kind of recoup our costs on that.
Okay, and that's paid to who?
Pay to the county.
Okay, thank you.
No. Any further questions for Alex? Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, just a quick one, I guess. So it doesn't sound like the treasury at the county has determined yet whether this is going to be a fixed rate or a floating interest rate on the borrowing you're doing. I just am concerned, I guess, part of the reason why we were looking to a partnership and a lease as opposed to, borrowing ourselves and building was that stability, that certainty, which we don't necessarily have, in our operations as also a creature of the province. We're reluctant to take on debt. So we hope we've already completed a levy increase to fund this move. And we don't really want to have to ask for more. So if you, are you going fixed or floating or you don't know yet?
So I haven't brought it to council yet. My personal preference would be go fixed, so, like as you mentioned, just for the stability and consistency of payments.
Okay, thank you.
And the conservation authority will be fully involved in that decision. So that both the timing and the fixed versus variable will essentially be a joint decision.
Go ahead, Paul.
So I appreciate the county allowing us to do this, and I think it's a great solution. But the only thing that worries me is for the county is the 21-year lease. Is how's the county covered if something happens to the conservation authority? If Queen's Park decide that there's going to be two conservation authorities and we're not one of them, is there anything in there that covers that?
So that would be, we'd have to consult with Mr. Fleming before in terms of the lease and how that would look. But I assume there would be some sort of a, that being said, if you were to vacate, we still have that adventure at that point. It can be another tenant, have regrown, we can use the space. Many years out, probably have crossed that bridge. But I would assume in terms of lease, conservation authority, have all of that covered through the.
Okay, anything further for Alex? Kelly, any further presentations this evening?
We're good, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate your presentation, and of course, you realize you're responsible for all these numbers, so. Then I'll turn it over to you, Jeanette.
There is a motion on the floor moved by Deputy Warden Doyle, seconded by Councillor Martin. Be it resolved that the Office of the Chief Administrator Administrative Officer review and award of the RFP for the redevelopment of the administrative building report be received. And further, that the Council of the County of Frontenac authorize the warden and clerk to enter into an agreement with Emmons and Mitchell Construction 2000 Limited for the renovations and additions for joint administrative facility for the County of Frontenac and the Cataraqui Regional Conservation Authority in the amount of $4,490,000, subject to the approval by the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority.
Donna has a question and I have a question.
Okay.
Just for legal reasons, it's Cataraqui region, not regional.
I'll make that correction.
Ron, go ahead.
Should the motion, basically, we're approving it here tonight. So shouldn't it be that we accept the report and be forwarded to our councils? Because they're the ones that are gonna make, I don't wanna, if we vote on it the way that I understood how that was read, then we've approved it tonight.
So if you approve the motion that was read, it still needs to go to county council because this is just an advisory committee, so you don't actually have power to make recommendations. So the motion that is read tonight goes to county council for approval.
That was my question as well, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you. You've heard the motion before you, then I guess, any further discussion on the motion?
One other comment, there's 5 county council members here though. It still doesn't matter, right? I don't want to have the majority of county council voting tonight.
So Councilor Rebel is here representing the Cataraqui Conservation
I
Authority. So
understand
he
that.
does not have the ability to vote tonight. This is just the admin task force that's voting.
Okay, thank you.
A clarification, Chair, is that tonight's vote would only be the members of the task force.
That is correct.
Okay. You've heard the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried.
So now it's just moved by Councilor Vanderwall, seconded by Councilor Martin, that the meeting hereby adjourn at 7:32 p.m.
All in favor of that motion? Thank you. Thank you, folks. And I want to thank, before we leave, I want to thank staff for all the work they've done on this project from both boards. Good night.
So you're going to vacate the Cataraqui region.
Good night, folks.
Okay.
Good night.
They're going to stay here.